I thought I'd briefly talk about anti-liberalism and how anti-liberalism as a school of thought is actually beyond reactionary thought, nationalism, and traditionalism. When you think anti-liberalism, you might think it has something to do with reactionary thought, nationalism, and traditionalism. But these are just some umbrella categories that don't like liberalism and criticize it, but I'm arguing that anti liberalism is actually hostile towards reactionary thought, nationalism, and traditionalism. So I started to have this thought after watching Caleb Maupin's video on the rise of illiberalism, which is a 40-minute video, and I strongly suggest you should watch on his subject on a communist. He's coming from a communist point of view, criticizing liberalism, which I think is completely needed to understand why our American society is in decay and why you can't base a race of people on liberalism. So, what is anti liberalism? So, anti liberalism is against the economic, the individual, and the ideological of any sorts of being liberal centric. Is against free markets, profit, and the non aggressive pact, which the non aggressive pact is a libertarian concept of the mind. And so anti liberalism is against libertarianism. It's against individualism, the ironic individual collective of individuals saying they don't belong to a collective, yet create a collective around being individuals, aka most white people. It's against subcultures, what Dig Hebdige wrote about. It's against consumerism, especially the soy boy, and ultimately this fetish of a Socratic Greek Roman society that's so endearing admixture European American people fetishize over, which must be utterly destroyed. Anti liberalism is against postmodernism as a school of thought. It's against ethno nationalism, the belief that people choose to create their own nationalism. It's against pseudo intellectualism, that anyone and anyone can be an intellectual or pretend to make video essays on Sonic 3 or something. And anti liberalism is ultimately against meta awareness, which is ironic because you think watching this YouTube video on anti liberalism, this means I would be against myself, correct? Well, I'm really against this ideological thing called liberalism and our strong Western belief in of it, and this assumption everyone should be an intellectual. Anti-liberalism is against any anarchist lifestyle philosophy, aka full autonomy, crime think, the belief that you don't want to do anything but be a trans blued hair thing. That those are all just things of liberalism. And so entirely anti-liberalism is against all this. It might be offensive to the big tech elites, might be offensive to the queer culture oligarchs, but this is ultimately the regime, I believe, that is powerful, is strong, and kind of what motivated subcultural groups as reactionary thought, nationalism to white nationalism, and even traditionalism, or any of those bizarre anti-SJW scenes. But I'm arguing is that anti-liberalism is beyond any of these thoughts and does not correlate, is not white nationalism. So, anti-liberalism is beyond reactionary thought. This is because Christianity is not an end-all solution. Rather, it's just a religion for any reactionary thought thinking it should return back to monarchy or a theologian society or something like that. Monarchy is paternal retardation LARPing. That somehow a king or some idiot on YouTube is going to be our king and we're going to follow him like Alcibiades to Socrates. You know, those who are feudalist apologists, they're wishing to be like the Chinese or Indians, some kind of bizarre Asian Aryanism that we're just going to be Chinese and Indians and act like non-whites and all our problems are going to be solved. Just listen to Alan Watts all the time, right? Reactionary thought is a popular trend to hate on SJWs and normie liberalism, but it's not a final solution. This is all just some trend to be popular, to know I don't like authority, right? This whole silly punk rock culture thing. But really, anti-liberalism would be ultimately against you having liberal thought in the first place. Again, anti-liberalism is beyond reactionary thought because reactionary thinkers become liberalism. Um, Anti-liberalism is beyond nationalism. I believe race is real. However, liberalism may be Eurocentric. That is, that the solution is not to get rid of X outsider group, but instead, what group is advocating liberalism? And it turns out the very group that's advocating nationalism are the liberals. There may be a liberal nationalism worshiping liberalism and its people, which is bad, but ultimately nationalism kicks out those who argue against their polite society, against their Christianlander Sweppel things, their IKEAs and their shopping malls, because polite society is nothing more than liberalism and a byproduct of capitalism. So how can you be proud to be liberal? This is nationalism for liberalism. And this is ultimately questioning whether it's a Eurocentric concept. And so anti-liberalism would be against nationalism. Anti-liberalism would be against traditionalism because liberalism, ironically may be in the traditionalist canon. That anti-liberalism assumes power over this trend and breaks it. Martin Heidegger is anti-liberal and ultimately argues for a new way of thinking outside of the current technological acceleration trend. Heidegger's answers have something to do with nature, but nature is not traditionalism because you want to be some kind of naturalist or nudist and you think it's all going to work out or something, and that you think all these are real, then this must be the answer, right? The holding on tradition. Well, anti-liberalism seeks to destroy any liberal form of tradition, which I believe is the destruction of whiteness, quote unquote, or middle class values. And some liberals think whiteness hurts liberalism, ironically, and can't see liberalism as white. So this is another argument. You might have to watch my video on what is white supremacy and whiteness, but it's something our oligarchic elites like to use to talk about middle class people, less about admixture European people. But traditionalism is not the answer against liberalism because traditionalism, depending on its context, may be traditionalist for liberalism. And so if you're an anti-liberal, you would be against traditionalism because you would ultimately see that there's some traditionalist values which harm people and that have nothing to do with us as people or as an organic animal. So to wrap this up, what is anti-liberalism for? Anti-liberalism is the complete destruction of the neoliberal capitalist system, its culture, the people, and this worship of any oligarchic queer culture. I know in the past I've worshipped queer culture as the center of the arts, and that the only way you could succeed as an artist is by being queer. However, this is just a sign of liberalism, and the sign that we have this capacity and freedom. So anti-liberalism is worse than being a Nazi. By being an anti-liberal, everyone assumes you're some backwards European person or sympathetic to North Korean Juche philosophy. Anti-liberalism destroys, harms, and hurts the decadent opponent that rules over us. Anti-liberalism is against pretentiousness. Anti-liberalism is humble. Human nature and limits is real. And what's real is race, our sexuality, our meaning to work, and violence. They're all real concepts that make us animals. And being in tone to these four things makes us better people. So we have to go beyond liberalism. Just don't fall into this Keith Wood category cringe of saying you're a third positionist and you're a liberal, but now supposedly you're anti-liberal, but actually you're masking yourself as a liberal, working under the capitalist system of big tech YouTube like everyone else is doing. So anti-liberal means is a complete hatred for everything and anything existing. Thanks for listening.